Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Baldwin. A sign of the times. Unless something dramatic happens, the government is about to shut down by the end of the day, and that's not the only crisis facing the White House right now. Not even close. The Secretary of Defense, seen as the last adult in the room, abruptly resigning after the president rejected his advice and decided to pull all U.S. troops out of Syria. In his resignation letter, Secretary Jim Mattis spelling out his worldview this way: my views on treating allies with respect and also being clear-eyed about both malign actors and strategic competitors are strongly held. And in a direct rebuke of the president, Mattis adds this: you have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours. So, what will the president's reaction be to this stunning rejection today? We may soon find out. The president will be facing cameras for the first time since Mattis' shocking announcement any minute now. Will he address this? Will he address the other crisis, the fast-approaching government shutdown to hit tonight? We'll bring you his remarks when they happen. CNN's Abby Phillip is at the White House. She's watching all of this right along with us. Abby, President Trump is set to be meeting with Senate Republicans right now. What are you hearing?
Well, Kate, this hastily called meeting is supposed to be happening as we speak, although it's not clear exactly if they started on time. We saw Mitch McConnell coming in around 10:30, but we did hear reports, according to our Ted Barrett on Capitol Hill, that some senators and their staff were having trouble getting into the compound because they didn't have enough time for the Secret Service to clear them into the building. That just goes to show just how quickly all of this is unfolding. President Trump is trying to get Republican senators on the same page as him about the plan to move forward. They passed a bill earlier this week that did not have border funding in it, and now President Trump is demanding that any bill that comes to his desk has that money. The problem is he may not have enough votes to pass it. Not only will he need 60 votes, which includes some Democrats, to pass it by the end of the day, but he would also need Republicans to be on board. So this could be an effort for President Trump to really convince his own soldiers to get on board with this plan. Meanwhile, President Trump is also pressuring Mitch McConnell to end the filibuster. He's saying this in a tweet this morning: Mitch, use the nuclear option and get it done. Our country is counting on you. Again, Kate, this is something President Trump has been talking about for so long. Mitch McConnell keeps batting it down. But even if he got rid of the nuclear option, are there 50 votes to pass this in the Senate? We don't really know yet, but I think the fact that this meeting is happening is a sign that the White House feels like there is more work to be done. President Trump was supposed to leave this afternoon for Florida for a 16-day vacation. The White House has said that if the government shuts down, he's not going to go. That being said, President Trump has already predicted that if there is a government shutdown, he says it's going to last for a long time. There's a lot of pessimism in the air right now, Kate, but we'll find out more about what happens once this meeting is over shortly.
No kidding. And if it has even started, first and foremost, Mitch McConnell, we need to get you through security and into the Oval Office. We'll see. We're going to watch it play out. Abby, thank you so much. So with just hours until the shutdown and critical votes about to start in the Senate, President Trump wants Senate Majority Leader, as Abby just mentioned, Mitch McConnell, to use the nuclear option when it comes to votes. So what is happening over there right now? CNN's Monty Raju is following all of this from Capitol Hill. Monty, what are you hearing right now about the status of things?
Well, Republican senators are trying to convince the president to go back to the initial position that they had earlier this week when they voted overwhelmingly by voice vote to keep the government open until February 8th, punting that fight over the wall into the new Congress. They left town, most of them did, after Wednesday, believing that the president was going to sign that into law. But when the president yesterday had a change of heart, decided to dig in and told his colleagues that he would not support any measure or sign any measure that does not include his wall money, well, that put things into serious flux as Republican senators are trying to figure out what to do next. Now, after the House passed its bill last night, the Senate will probably take up this afternoon that bill or try to take it up. But the problem is there aren't the votes to advance that measure. If it doesn't fail on the first procedural vote, it's definitely going to fail on the second procedural vote when it'll need 60 votes to break a Democratic filibuster. And that's where the president is now coming in saying, well, why not use what's known as the nuclear option to eliminate the filibuster and make it 50 votes to overcome the filibuster. But here's another problem, Kate. Republican after Republican are coming out strongly opposing that idea. Lamar Alexander, Orrin Hatch, Jeff Flake. So even if Mitch McConnell would to go go that route, which he opposes, he wouldn't even have the votes to change the rules. So all this points to the fact that there is really no strategy at the moment to avert a shutdown, and Republicans hope that at this meeting they can convince the president to back off, endorse some short-term measure to keep the government open. Otherwise, we could be staring at a shutdown at the end of the day. And Chuck Schumer, just moments ago, Kate, tweeted he said, "You own the shutdown, your own words, Donald Trump. The Senate unanimously passed a bipartisan solution to avoid a shutdown. Then you threw another temper tantrum and convinced the House to ignore that compromise." So it looks like things are no closer than they were last night, Kate.
Yeah, and regardless of tweets flying back and forth, you own it, no, you own it. The fact of the matter is, if the votes aren't there, the votes aren't there. And that is, as you said, the plain and simple reality that Republicans and the president are talking about, or need to be talking about right now. Manu, stick close. Long day for you. We're going to come back to you. I really appreciate it. But joining me right now to discuss this and kind of the state of play and crisis on I don't know how many fronts now, CNN political director David Chalian. David, let's talk about where I was just discussing with Manu. The number 2 Republican in the Senate this morning, he retweeted an excellent point by the Washington Post, Paul Kane, which was also the excellent point by Manu Raju. And Paul Kane writes this: to be clear, going nuclear in the Senate isn't something McConnell could do alone. He'd need at least 50 of 51 GOP senators. The votes aren't there. John Cornyn retweeted that. Is that everything that the president needs to know about this one?
John Cornyn's job is to count the votes in the Republican conference, right? That's his actual job as the number 2. And yes, he's there retweeting, affirming. I know sometimes people say retweets don't equal endorsements, but obviously the guy who counts the vote is affirming the fact the votes aren't there. And Donald Trump knows this. This is, as you're saying, the votes aren't there. So you can do the blame game all you want, but without the votes, you actually need to get some sort of compromise in place in order to keep the government open.
Yeah. And I mean, I just want to play out a little bit, if I could, in summary of what's happened this week, right? The president gives on the border wall, and he faces backlash from conservatives. He then makes this surprise announcement about pulling troops out of Syria, and he faces huge backlash from that. Maybe the most huge of that would be Mattis resigning. So then he goes back to the border wall, and now he's not only facing a shutdown, he's a defense secretary resigning. Are these two crises of the president's own making, are they connected?
It's a good question, Kate. I mean, they're certainly of his own making, but they are both in pursuit of policies that he long campaigned on and told us about. He has informed the country for years, right? He wants that border wall, no matter what. He wants it. He told us Mexico would pay for it. Obviously, now he's fighting for the U.S. Treasury to pay for it first, taxpayers, and then maybe get reimbursed down the road, he hopes, even though Mexico said that's not happening. And on Syria, he has long told us his plan is to pull troops out of there. He doesn't want to be involved in the Middle East in the way and in areas of the world where U.S. troops are that other presidents have had there. He's made that clear. But in the way in which he has gone about pursuing these two policies of his, he has been all over the map, as you indicate. You said he gave on the wall first. He certainly indicated enough for Mike Pence to give the impression to all the Republican senators up there he was going to sign a government funding bill and live to fight the wall fight another day. He had indicated that perhaps there was, last spring there was a moment with Syria, and he indicated perhaps there is a different way to go about this. Now he just tweeted it out. He's doing this in defiance of a Secretary of Defense who clearly now resigned in protest. So it's the manner in which he's going about pursuing these policies that seems to upend the world around him.
Yeah, I mean, in the politics of a shutdown, we have seen this before. I mean, insert different issue, it's a balanced budget agreement or Obamacare. We've seen this under other presidents and other Congresses. The politics over the Syria decision, we haven't seen necessarily. I mean, I haven't heard a Republican that's backing him on this. I mean, who is then he trying to keep happy?
Well, I think he believes, and he may have some, there may be some truth to this, that it is a potentially popular position with the American people to bring troops home, to not have them involved in somebody else's civil war or somebody else's mess. He long think he tapped into a vein of support across the country with that kind of worldview, Kate. So I do think he sees some appeal there to voters. But you are right. You don't hear any support for the way in which he's done this and the policy announced from Republicans. And to now have, and this is what's so different about it, the Mattis's resignation and protest, it's not just about Syria, Kate. This is about America and President Trump's worldview that General Mattis can no longer support after 4 decades of service.
And I think, I mean, we've been saying it since it came out, but the fact that Jim Mattis, who is not a blowhard, that he would come out with that rebuke in that letter so publicly, it is a huge statement. I mean, he was long seen as a central figure, if you will, in kind of the narrative of an axis of adults around the president, the keepers from chaos that were kind of keeping the president from his most extreme impulses. Now Mattis is out, and he was seen as the last one there. Yeah. Is the president without guardrails?
It seems to be he is, or at least the guardrails that many Republicans inside the administration, as you know, and on Capitol Hill had been relying upon. Yeah. And so he is without those guardrails now. He probably is a bit more untethered in many ways. And that is why you hear more concern now from Republicans than we have heard in the entirety of the 2 years of his presidency thus far.
Yeah, bad headlines is one thing, and one thing the president has seen a lot of in 2 years. But what is the impact of real decisions like this in Syria, potentially in Afghanistan, and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis saying, I can no longer be here? We'll see. Great to see you, David. I really appreciate it. Thank you. With all of this in mind, we are keeping a close eye on the White House, where any moment we could hear from the president. President Trump is supposed to be meeting with Republicans. He also has a bill signing that's supposed to be happening. Timing is, as always, TBD. So we will bring that to you when it begins. Plus, it's not just Syria. Secretary Mattis is also fuming over the president's desire to cut troop levels in Afghanistan as well. I just returned from Afghanistan following Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Why Graham now says pulling out of Afghanistan right now could lead to another 9/11. We are watching the clock and the nation's capital, because unless something gives between now and midnight, parts of the federal government will be running out of money and shutting down. President Trump tweeting just a short time ago the following: the Democrats now own the shutdown. But I think we are all old enough to remember that the president's saying this is actually all on him.
And I'll tell you what, I am proud to shut down the government for border security, Chuck. I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
That's correct. That was literally 10 days ago. Example 459,000 at this point, that the president often does not say what he means or means what he says, which leaves everyone else wondering if they can trust anything that's coming out of his mouth. Joining me right now, Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin of New York. He's a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thank you for coming in.
Happy to.
Do you think the government's going to shut down?
We'll see. I mean, the House passed a bill that's over in the Senate, so we'll see what the move is here on the Senate side over the course of the next couple of hours. But being able to answer that question, maybe a couple hours from now, I can give you a more concrete answer. I don't know what the Senate's next move is going to be.
Well, and I think what you say is maybe the most important statement of it is that tenuous of a situation. It is changing really minute by minute.
Yeah, sure. So you have a House-passed bill that Senator Schumer says is dead on arrival in the Senate. You have a Senate-passed bill that the president is saying is dead on arrival in the White House. So I think what is most important is for whether you're Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, the White House, a member of Congress, leadership, rank and file, now it's time to talk, to compromise, to reach an agreement, to be able to keep the government open and to find a way for the government not only to stay open, but for Republicans and Democrats to all be able to vote for it. Listen, you're not going to be able to get a unanimous vote. You don't need one. You need 60 votes over in the Senate. But if people are just staying in their corners and they're just talking to their base, they're not talking to each other, then we're going to have a partial government shutdown at midnight.
Well, and to that point, I mean, I've seen, I think it was on Twitter, you criticized Democrats for holding out for 100% of their demands. But where things stand right now, isn't that exactly what Republicans are doing as well?
I'll tell you, I'm willing to compromise. I'm willing to vote for different versions of legislation, whether we're talking about funding the government, whether we're talking about immigration, talking about health care. I think that's the attitude that my constituents back home want. I think that's what Americans all across the country want. So it's not about getting 100% of what you want.
In the absence of that we were talking about, would you be more in favor of punting, right? A continuing resolution of exactly the funding as is to have that debate later on?
No, there's too much punting that goes on here in the Capitol.
Okay.
I'm just finishing up my 4th year here in Congress, and when you're talking about these really important issues that impact us today, or maybe even most importantly, my daughters, they're 12 years old, their entire generation, punting it for them to have to deal with many years from now. I think we are elected with a responsibility to take tough votes, tackle tough challenges today, and there's too much punting. And by the way, sometimes the punting happens on third down, where we don't even engage in the conversation and try to work things out. So, no, I think the tough work is for us to be here talking to each other and working through these issues.
I want to ask you about Secretary Mattis. You applauded him as a warrior. What does it say that he says that he can't work with the president anymore because their views don't align? And we know that the president is rejecting his advice.
So Secretary Mattis, decades of amazing service to our country, to his core. The man bleeds red, white, and blue. He's going to be sorely missed. The good news about our great country, and this has happened through the generations, and I know right now, I'm still in the Army right now as a reservist. Yeah. There are a lot of great generals, admirals, sometimes Secretary of Defense appointments don't even have that level of military experience, and they come on. So I'm confident that there are a whole lot of great candidates to pick to be the next Secretary of Defense, and whoever the next president is, for them to pick one. So there is a difference of opinion. There should be good chemistry between the Secretary of Defense and the president. The Secretary of Defense makes recommendations. Sometimes we'll make strong recommendations to the President of the United States, but the president, whoever it is at that time, makes the call on whether or not to take that recommendation. A decision is made by Secretary Mattis to move on. Hopefully we get the right secretary in next who has many of the great leadership traits of Secretary General James Mattis, but I do agree that there needs to be good chemistry, and I don't know all the exchanges that have taken place over the course of the last couple of years between the two, but obviously there's a pretty strong difference of opinion on some of the issues that matter most, and that's important.
I mean, I just got back from Afghanistan, and this is a man, Mattis, who's revered by so many in the military. I met a pilot on his 6th deployment. He had a picture of Mattis hanging in the flight deck because he told me that it brought him comfort being away from his family, knowing that Mattis was in charge. What message does this send to him?
Yeah, well, again, there are a lot of amazing generals, great leaders in the military, and that's why it's really important to have an exceptional nomination, an exceptional replacement for Secretary Mattis, because, as you point out, there are men and women all throughout the ranks, many in harm's way, some might be on their 10th deployment, who want to know that everyone all the way up the chain of command has their back. And the good thing about the reputation, the legacy of James Mattis is that you can be a private, you can be a junior officer in harm's way, and you know all the way up to the top of the food chain at the highest levels of the Pentagon that you have a secretary who had your back. And that's why you need a replacement who does the same.
And Mattis, in doing that, he was vehemently against the decision that the president then announced. He was vehemently against the decision to pull troops out of Syria. Do you agree with the president on that decision?
Yeah, so as far as Syria goes, I believe two things are really important that may have been missing here. One is, from my understanding from past briefings, that we have counterparts, Russia is one of them, engaged in Syria, where if we are willing to make the move of taking all of our troops out of Syria, that's a major strategic, operational, tactical decision for those 2,000 troops to be leaving, that we should be getting something for that. Now, I have not yet been briefed on being wrong in my assumption that we did not get anything in return for pulling those 2,000 troops. I would love to be wrong, but my understanding is that we just made a decision to pull them out. Secondly, is that you don't want that vacuum to be filled by aggressive adversaries' threats to the United States. You don't want the Turks to come in and wipe out the country.
Is this a good decision?
Well, no. These are the two reasons why I have an issue with the decision that was made, and that second part being I don't want to read a few weeks after those troops pull out of the Turks coming in and wiping out Kurds. I don't want to see stories of ISIS filling that void and returning to their bad tactics of the past. So those are two. Whether it's local governance, it's the Kurds, it's a coalition force. Yeah. My second point that I'm concerned about is that I'm not seeing the transition that I would want to see in Syria.
And that's just one area that we need to be talking about today. Congressman, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Kate.
Coming up for us, President Trump. He's going to be speaking from the White House. Will he respond to Secretary Mattis? Will he bend on the border wall? And what does this chaos mean for everyone not in Washington, everyone outside of Washington? Stay with us. The abrupt resignation of Defense Secretary James Mattis sending shockwaves through the country and around the world, quite frankly. And now CNN is reporting a military official who regularly talks to Mattis called the letter of resignation a, quote, dog whistle to anyone in uniform, but particularly through the General Officer Corps, that they should resign if they have issues with President Trump's policies. So, what does that now mean for the U.S. military? Joining me right now, former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. Director, it's great to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Kate.
Your reaction last night to the news of Mattis's resignation was that the country is less safe without Jim Mattis. Why is that the case?
Well, I think Dan Coates' public release today, in which he characterized Jim Mattis as a national treasure, kind of says it all. Jim is unique. Somebody will follow him, but I think it's going to be very difficult to replace him. The country has been blessed for 2 years to have him in that position. I found his letter stunning, but not surprising. I'm not an intimate of his, but I knew from the get-go that this wouldn't last, and at some point, because Jim Mattis is a very principled man, that he would have to leave.
And I just had a Republican congressman on, Director, who said there are the good news is there are a lot of great generals, a lot of people who can serve and be a great secretary after Mattis, and who should hold up the ideals and leadership qualities of Mattis. But after reading Mattis's resignation letter, I wonder who you see actually taking the job, because whose views are going to more align with the president's, who is akin to a Mattis.
Well, that's exactly the point, and the typical Beltway game here of speculating on who might replace him has obviously already started. But my concern, and I think the fear of a lot of people, is that we'll end up with an echo chamber for the president, who does not like dissent, apparently. He wants complete compliance. And that is not not a healthy thing. And I think Jim, of course, who has a completely different set of values and a different worldview, provided that contrarian view, which is extremely important. And I fear that, yes, there are a lot of great people, but I'm not sure who would want to take this on unless they're going to be an echo chamber for the president.
And what Mattis said in his resignation was jarring enough. Why do you think that what the letter doesn't say is just as important?
Well, it was a very compelling letter, both by what it did say. It was a tactful and classy rebuke of the president. It was respectful and all that. It omitted at the end the typical line about what an honor it has been to serve in this administration and to work for you, Mr. President. I thought that was a very glaring and telling omission, and it said a lot.
That is interesting, because I'm sure you know very well how to write a letter when you're leaving. A letter when you're leaving such an important and high-profile post.
Yeah, I've done it myself.
Exactly. On Ryan Brown's reporting that I was saying in the lead-in, that at least one military official is now calling his letter a dog whistle to anyone in uniform, that they should resign if this should kind of be an opening for them to resign if they don't agree with Trump's policies. Do you see it that way? Do you think that's what Jim Mattis would have intended?
I think I don't know about being a dog whistle, but I think it serves as a model, a template for someone with principles to express his concern and his unwillingness to serve further. And so it's not just for a message for the military, but I think it's a message for anyone in this administration, notably other cabinet officials. So to me, even in departing, Jim has set the model, and I think others need to think about that. Now, I have to say that, you know, what precipitated this was a withdrawal from Syria. That's a lawful presidential order, but I served as a general officer for about 13 years, and, you know, you do think about that. You know, can I serve in an administration where I can't agree with the principles? And I think a lot of generals and admirals, I think, are thinking about that.
Do you think, when it comes to the decision in Syria, and it comes to kind of the shockwaves that the Mattis's decision has created, could the president unring this bell? Can he settle things down with an announcement of another secretary? It seems new times in an already chaotic era.
Well, that's, I guess, supposed theoretically possible, but extremely unlikely that the president would do anything that would even infer that he made a mistake in judgment.
Right.
Now, my comment, you know, a lot of people talked about the implications of this. Previous segment made a good point about we didn't get anything for this, not unlike moving our embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, where we didn't get any benefit from that. And this has global implications, and I would just cite the example of North Korea. Why should North Korea believe anything we say to them about assurances of their security if they denuclearize? After watching this, you know, this